Marissa Thompson had always known that success in the banking world, especially as a black woman, would not come easily. She had spent the better part of her life defying expectations, breaking down barriers, and proving that leadership was not defined by the color of your skin or your gender, but by your ability to adapt, innovate, and stay true to your vision. As the CEO of Legacy Financial Bank, she had built a reputation as a shrewd businesswoman, a pioneer who led with a fierce sense of integrity and purpose. She knew that every decision she made, every step she took, was watched not only by her colleagues, but by the very system that had once tried to exclude her. Despite her meteoric rise, Marissa had never forgotten where she came from. She had grown up in a modest neighborhood, raised by a single mother who had worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Marissa understood the value of hard work, perseverance, and the importance of giving back to the community. She made it a point to stay grounded, regularly visiting her old neighborhood, speaking at local schools, and mentoring young women aspiring to make their mark in the business world. Her success wasn't just for her, it was for everyone who had believed in her when the world hadn't. One Thursday afternoon, after a series of back-to-back meetings that had stretched into the late hours of the morning, Marissa decided to make an impromptu visit to one of Legacy Financial's busiest branches. It was a tradition of hers to check in on the operations of the bank without prior notice, ensuring that the teams were running smoothly and staying true to the company's standards. Marissa prided herself on being hands-on, and her reputation as a CEO who led by example had earned her the respect of her employees. They knew that if she showed up unannounced, it was not to criticize, but to connect, to understand the pulse of the bank, and to make sure that the company was delivering on its promises to customers. As she walked into the branch, the cool rush of air conditioning greeted her, a welcome contrast to the warm summer day outside. The bank was bustling with activity, customers lined up at the counters, and employees were busy processing transactions. Marissa took a moment to survey the scene, her eyes scanning the room with practiced precision. She was always aware of the environment around her, noting the little things, the efficiency of the staff, the clarity of the signage, the overall atmosphere. "Good afternoon, Miss Thompson." One of the tellers, a young woman with dark braids and a nervous smile, greeted her as she approached the counter. Marissa smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, Emma. How's everything going today?" "Everything's great," Emma replied, though her voice wavered slightly as she handed Marissa a slip for a deposit. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to make a withdrawal," Marissa said, her tone calm and matter-of-fact as she handed over her bank card and identification, just as any regular customer would. There was no special treatment needed. She didn't expect or want any special treatment. She was simply here to ensure that the processes were being followed properly. Emma took the card and began processing the transaction, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. For a moment, Marissa's gaze wandered across the room, observing the other customers and employees. She could sense the tension in the air, a mix of anticipation and concentration, as the busy afternoon unfolded. As her mind wandered, she didn't notice the subtle shift in Emma's demeanor. The young teller's hands paused, then hovered above the keys, her face turning pale. Marissa's instincts kicked in, and she raised an eyebrow. "Is something wrong?" Emma hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously toward her supervisor. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but it seems there's an issue with the withdrawal. I'll need to call my manager for assistance." A sense of confusion washed over Marissa. "What do you mean, issue?" "I'm withdrawing my own money," she said, her voice calm but tinged with an undercurrent of frustration. Emma muttered an apology as she dialed the manager's number, whispering something under her breath. A few moments later, a man in his late 40s appeared from the back office. Carl, the branch manager, had worked at the bank for over a decade. He was well respected by his colleagues, though his interactions with customers were often seen as overly formal. Today, that formality felt like a veil, hiding something more uncomfortable beneath the surface. "Hello, ma'am. How can I assist you today?" Carl asked, his voice warm but stiff, as if he had just realized who was standing before him. Marissa held his gaze, her patience beginning to wear thin. "I'm here to withdraw some funds," she said. Emma was processing the transaction, but she mentioned there was a problem. Can you explain why I'm being asked to wait? Carl glanced at Emma, who quickly averted her eyes. It seems that there's an issue with the amount you're trying to withdraw. We need to perform additional verification for such a large transaction, Carl explained, his eyes fixed on the computer screen as if the answer was somehow hidden there. A wave of disbelief washed over Marissa. She had been, with Legacy, financial from the beginning. She was the one who had signed the checks to build the very branch they were standing in. She had watched this bank grow from a small startup to a major player in the industry, and now, after everything, she was being treated like an ordinary customer who hadn't met the necessary security protocols. "Excuse me," Marissa said, her voice tightening with irritation. "I'm the CEO of this bank, and I'm here to withdraw my own money. Why am I being treated like some random person off the street who doesn't have an account with you?" Carl's face turned red as the realization hit him. "I understand that this is an unusual situation, but ma'am, you're trying to withdraw a large sum of money, and we have strict procedures." "I don't care about your procedures," Marissa snapped, her voice rising slightly. "You should have recognized me as soon as I walked in here. You should have known that I don't need to jump through hoops to get my own funds. I built this institution. I don't need to be subjected to these protocols like I'm a regular customer." The tension in the room was palpable now, and Marissa could feel the eyes of the staff on her. She could feel the weight of their judgment, the unspoken thoughts hanging in the air. It was clear that Carl was floundering, unsure of how to handle the situation, while Emma stood silently behind the counter, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding drama. Without saying another word, Marissa turned on her heel, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor as she made her way toward the door. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but her anger was controlled, deliberate. She would not allow herself to be humiliated like this. She would not stand for it. She had worked too hard for too long, and she wasn't about to let one careless mistake from a manager undermine everything she had built. As she stepped outside the bank, the cool breeze against her skin did little to calm her nerves. The incident had rattled her more than she was willing to admit. She wasn't angry because of the security protocols. She was angry because she had been disrespected, reduced to someone who had to prove her worth, despite the fact that she was the very heart and soul of the bank. Without another thought, Marissa pulled out her phone and dialed her assistant. "I'll be back at the office in 15 minutes, she said, her voice tight with resolve. "I need to speak with Carl immediately." The consequences of the day's events had already begun to unfold, and Marissa knew that nothing would go unaddressed. This was not just about one incident at a bank branch. This was about respect, authority, and the very foundation upon which Legacy Financial had been built. And she would make sure that no one ever forgot that again. Back in her office, Marissa sat at her sleek, modern desk, her fingers tapping restlessly against the polished surface. The rhythmic sound echoed in the otherwise quiet room, punctuating the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. How had Carl, a seasoned manager she had personally promoted, become so utterly unaware of her position and the respect she was due? She had worked tirelessly to build Legacy Financial Bank from the ground up, and now she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about her own employees. How had Carl, of all people, failed to recognize her when she walked into that branch? How could he, of all people, treat her like an anonymous face, an ordinary customer just like any other? The more she thought about it, the more insulted she became. Marissa wasn't just angry about the inconvenience at the bank, it was the blatant disrespect, the assumption that she had to prove her worth despite being the very person who had created the institution. She could feel the heat of the humiliation creeping up her neck, but she buried it under a veil of control. She wouldn't let anyone see how deeply this had cut her, not even Carl. She had built this empire. There was no room for weakness now. She had to be strong for herself and for the bank. Her leadership depended on it. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Miss Thompson, Carl is here to see you. He says he wants to apologize," her assistant said hesitantly, peeking through the crack in the door. "Send him in," Marissa replied, her voice calm, yet laced with an unmistakable edge. She was ready. Carl would have to answer for his actions, and this time there would be no leniency. A few moments later, Carl walked into the room, his shoulders slumped, his eyes avoiding hers. He seemed smaller than she remembered, his confidence deflated by the weight of what he had done. He closed the door softly behind him and stood there awkwardly, unsure of how to begin. "Miss Thompson, Carl stammered, his voice faltering as he tried to find the right words. "Carl," Marissa interrupted, her tone sharp, her gaze unwavering. "I've just had the most insulting experience at one of our branches. Not only was I treated like an ordinary customer, but I was also denied access to my own money. Can you explain to me why that happened?" Carl swallowed hard, his face flushing with embarrassment. I understand that this situation has been frustrating, and I apologize. It was a misunderstanding," he trailed off, unable to meet her eyes. "A misunderstanding?" Marissa's voice was controlled, but her words were ice cold. "What part of this was a misunderstanding, Carl? You know who I am. You've worked for me for years, and yet you felt it was acceptable to treat me like a stranger in my own bank." Carl's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He seemed to shrink under her gaze, his body language betraying his nervousness. Marissa's anger was still simmering, but she kept it in check. She had learned long ago that emotional reactions could cloud judgment. She wasn't about to let Carl off the hook, but she also couldn't afford to let her frustration overtake the professionalism that had gotten her this far. She stood up from her desk, walking toward the window. The view from her office was breathtaking, the city's skyline stretching far into the horizon. She found a sense of calm in the vastness of the world outside, though her mind remained sharp and focused on the matter at hand. Carl remained silent, watching her with a mixture of guilt and trepidation. Marissa's gaze never left the window as she spoke again, her voice softer but no less firm. "Carl, I gave you a chance to prove yourself. I promoted you to manager because I believed in your potential. I thought you understood what it meant to lead, to represent this company, to respect the hierarchy. But today, you've shown me that you don't understand any of that. You don't understand what it means to respect the people who built this institution with you, or the ones who entrusted you with a position of power." She turned around slowly, locking eyes with him. Her stare was unwavering, her words cutting through the air like a knife. "I'm sorry, Carl, but this is where your time at Legacy Financial ends. You're fired." Carl's face drained of color, the shock evident on his features. "What? Miss Thompson, please, I can explain. It wasn't meant like that. I didn't mean to. I've heard enough," Marissa said, her voice now cool, decisive, and final. There was no room for excuses or justifications. This was about more than a simple mistake. It was about the larger principles she had worked so hard to uphold. "You'll gather your things and leave by the end of the day. The HR department will be in touch with your severance details. I don't tolerate disrespect, not even for my employees." Carl took a few hesitant steps forward, as though he might try to say something more, but the words didn't come. He simply nodded, a defeated expression crossing his face as he turned and walked toward the door. Marissa watched him go, her posture still rigid, her resolve firm. Once the door clicked shut behind him, Marissa let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Her heart still raced, but it wasn't from anger. It was the rush of authority, the satisfaction that came with making the right decision. She had made her point. She had reminded Carl of the most important lesson in leadership: respect. Without it, everything else crumbled. She sat back down at her desk, her hands resting on the cool surface. As much as she hated the discomfort of firing someone, she knew it was necessary. The legacy she had worked so hard to build could not afford to have its foundation shaken by someone who couldn't grasp the basic principles of professionalism and respect. Marissa had never been one to make decisions lightly, but this was a line that could not be crossed. If Carl couldn't even treat his CEO with the basic courtesy she deserved, how could she trust him to lead the team effectively? Her thoughts drifted to the larger picture. This incident wasn't just about Carl. It was about the entire company. If someone in a position of authority could so easily forget the hierarchy and respect due to the CEO, what did that say about the culture they were fostering at Legacy Financial? Marissa couldn't afford to let this kind of behavior go unchecked. She picked up the phone and dialed the head of HR. Janet, Marissa said when the call was answered, I need to implement new protocols for staff interactions with high-profile clients, particularly with executives. We can't afford any more lapses in judgment like this. Effective immediately, I want all staff members to undergo a refresher course on customer service with a special focus on internal hierarchy and respect for senior leadership. We need to make sure that every employee understands that no one is exempt from showing respect to the people who built this company. She paused, listening to Janet's response, and then nodded firmly. Great. Let me know when the training can be arranged. And please, make sure that this message is communicated clearly across all branches. Marissa hung up the phone and looked out the window again, the weight of the decision settling in. She had faced challenges before, both personal and professional, but this moment felt different. This wasn't just about Carl's mistake. It was about the very values that guided her leadership, values she refused to compromise. The bank was her vision, her legacy, and she would protect it at all costs. Legacy Financial Bank was hers, and she was in control. She had fought too hard to let anyone undermine the respect that came with her position. This was her company, her creation, and no one, no matter how long they had been with her, would ever forget that again.